Good evening and welcome to another edition of Filmnut. I am your host, Jeff Schubert. Glad you can join us tonight. Well, a lot of times on Filmnut, we interview various people from various departments that have to do with making a film, which we love and we value, and we're going to be doing very frequently. But tonight we're going to deviate from that a little bit because in order to make a film, you need money and you need to know how to raise it. And you also need to know about things like distribution, attaching talent, directors, and so forth, which is all a very big part of the process, and we have a great guest with us tonight to do that. First, I want to give a quick word or a quick update. I know we just recently went through here in California, and many of you are aware of the writer's strike that was resolved. Over the weekend, the Screen Actors Guild and the American Federation of Radio and Television Artists, which is AFTRA, split. Those are the two different unions that represent actors, and the actors' contract expires with the producers' union at the end of June. So we'll be keeping an eye on that. They've split because they disagree on how they should proceed with negotiations. So there could be another strike at the end of June. We hope not, but we'll keep up to date on it. And if you guys have information, put it on the boards and we'll follow it together. So, getting to tonight's guest, she has years of experience in film finance, entertainment law. She is also an adjunct professor at NYU University and University of California in Los Angeles. Prior to being in that field, she was working in production and development. She is licensed to practice law in the state of New York and in Europe. Ladies and gentlemen, Bianca Bezdek.
Hello.
Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Very excited, to talk to you because, it's all about show me the money.
Show me the money.
You know what I'm saying? How do we do it?
Help me, help you.
Help me, help. Yes, right. Help you, help me. I will help you, help me.
Yes.
I'll get it right sooner or later. So we have a lot to talk about, but if we can start off with, what are some of the different ways that filmmakers can raise money for films?
Okay. Well, there's a few very simple categories. None of them are really the low-hanging fruit. They're all difficult in their own right, but let me begin to demystify.
Okay.
Of course, equity. Everybody understands, this is not a poor man's sport.
Right.
You will need to have some private equity in play, basically from which to make pair play offers or to lure talent or just basically to get the train going.
So equity needs somebody rich, give me money for a film.
It could be a high net worth individual. It could be a collective of investors. It could be a company that wants to kind of cross-brand, and part of their commitment is dollars.
Right.
That could come in a number of forms.
And pay-or-play offers, meaning you make an offer to a star, or I'll let you explain it.
Yes. Well, a pay-or-play is if you need someone, let's say you've got two main stars, your film actually doesn't really become real as a viable investment or production until you can prove that you have some skin in the game. And that's when you can't find your way around the agent to get to the talent.
Right.
So you have to make an offer that is a firm offer that of XYZ. However, everyone has a different quote. But when you make that offer, you get the talent for a particular window. And should the production get off the ground, then you will make the payment. And should that production not get off the ground, you will have to make the payment.
Right.
So that's a fair play.
And typically, if a star commands, let's say, $1 million salary to be in a movie, the pay-or-play offer would be what, in a 10 to 20% range of that?
Well, you would have to escrow a portion of that, yeah.
But it wouldn't be the full million.
It's to be negotiated. Every deal memo is its own animal.
Right.
I get clients or just inquiring minds asking me all the time, the old catch-22,
right.
How do I get the money if I don't have the star? How do I get the star if I don't have the money?
And your answer is?
And, well, pray,
right.
beg, borrow, and steal. And then there's obviously the other ways to go about it, which is maybe there's a star that is on the precipice of producing or directing, and you can appeal to them in that respect. For example, there's a film that, without naming names, I was advising on in as a producer in that capacity, and we did not want to actually make any pair plays, but we managed to get a very commercial, bankable star without one by allowing him to be a producer in the film. And he had, of course, his own production shingle, and with his production partner, we brought them in because they had as much ownership in the production as we did, and that signals to the sales agent that the talent that I say I will deliver, I will deliver. They're not going anywhere. They have, their in-kind contribution is for them attaching themselves without the deal memo, and that's kind of the way you can work around some managers and agents. Occasionally, it won't work for everyone, but it's worth a shot.
Yeah, and find a creative way to get to the talent. We had a writer, Catherine Fouget, on a few weeks ago, and she talked about just dressing up as a delivery person and delivering the script to the star who she wanted to be in her film.
Okay.
And that worked.
Like by hook or by crook, like
That's
I
right.
said.
There you go. Be creative. Okay, so there's private equity, and what?
Before I go to the other roads of alternative non-equity funding,
right.
It's important for every filmmaker to realize that there's no magic bullet. There is no foolproof formula. Every film is its own creature, and I can just give guidelines and general rules of thumb, but whatever works at the end of the day. If you can raise 100% of your budget through equity, fantastic, I commend you. But that may take you forever. So what I'm going to be suggesting is to go about the process with not having to raise more than about 30 to 40% of your budget through that private equity. So that leads us to the next alternative source.
Before we get to the next one, because I want to get to it, Rev24 has a comment. Raising money for indie film is depressing. I hear you, but that's why we're here tonight. We're here to deal with it and talk about it and find out how to make it undepressing.
Yeah, and as I mentioned to you, filmmaking is not a poor man's sport, much like yachting or or sailing or whatever. You have to know how to put in the work, and you have to have that. You have to have the ability to raise some equity. It's not easy, and it will cost you something.
And would you say you also have to be a risk taker, and you have to be all in?
Yeah, you can't be bashful.
Right.
That's the thing. You don't ask, you don't get.
Right.
That's the business. But after we get through all these alternative means of funding, I can maybe present some opportunities to be able to give producers a way to back out the equity and reclaim 100% ownership in their film. And so not only is equity difficult to raise, you're giving away your ownership by raising it. Right. So there are other ways where you can raise the financing while maintaining creative control and maintaining ownership, such as tax credits. Tax credits. Tax, it's not a sexy thing.
Another depressing topic.
Right. Now all the viewers are going to sleep.
No, trust me, you're going to want to hear this.
But there are ways, previously for generations abroad, filmmakers had to rely on non-equity means and non-studio means, and that was through, in France, there's the classic system of subsidy financing, and in Germany there were certain tax opportunities, in the UK there were sale and leasebacks, and obviously Canada.
So ways to get the government to fund or pay for your
Yes,
work, right?
Through a trickle-down benefit of bringing in productions.
Right.
And so the United States finally realized how much of these production dollars they were losing to runaway production.
TV shows and films running away to Canada, right?
Yes. And they just realized, okay, we have to do something, because if you think about it, what's the greatest American export we have left?
Films.
Entertainment.
Yeah.
That's all we are, unfortunately.
Exactly. Yeah.
So, they wanted to put a stop to it, and it started with, Hawaii and Louisiana, and now it's trickled down to 38 states, and also there's a federal incentive, and if filmmakers learn how to exploit these opportunities, this is money that you can get, or certification that you can qualify for, rebates, that you get the benefit of this money, and you don't have to give away your back-end profit participation. So that's number 2. Number 3 is pre-sales, of course, and we can talk about those later. And with pre-sales comes debt financing, trying to fill that shortfall at the end of this exercise, and we can talk about how they all relate to each other.
Wonderful. Let's get to another comment. Cricket Lee says, "Can you explain completion bonds and how they work? What happens when you can't get one?"
Well, if you can't get one, you might have a very difficult time raising equity, because think about it, if I were an investor, a completion bond it's kind of an insurance, it's not actually an insurance policy, but it's like an insurance blanket that says for X% of my budget, 2 or 3% of my budget, I'm employing a company to come in and monitor me and to step in when I exceed the contingency that I've built into my budget because we're getting behind schedule. And this is an indicator to the investor that you very well may lose their investment.
Right.
So when there is a completion bond in place, then they step in and they complete the film. Perhaps not of the quality or the aesthetic eye that, with that you would have wanted, but they get the film in the can so that it has a shot at distribution to make money back for the investors.
And reasons why one might not be able to get one?
You don't have a bondable director. The director just simply doesn't have the experience or hasn't worked in that medium before. So for a number of reasons, it's not just that. If a company says your budget doesn't make sense, the completion bond, they know that the below the line is too heavy, or the above the line is too heavy, or something in this formula doesn't work. So we don't want to take the risk on to step in and finish it because we know that we're going to be out of pocketing. That sends a direct signal to investors that if they say the likelihood is that you will not complete the film, the stakes go up.
Right.
So,
Philip PS80 would like to ask, what do you think about people that are just self-distributing on sites like iTunes?
I really don't work with that kind of distribution mechanism. The kind of films that I specialize in. Well, previously I should tell listeners or viewers that I started working for the studios for Paramount, New Line, and Universal. They were the 3 largest clients when I was in a larger law firm before I had my practice, and we focused on the tentpole films. So it was Harry Potter, it was Lara Croft, it was Rush Hour, etc. And then I worked my way. The joke is I've been working my way down ever since to the indie market.
To Filmnut.
But the type of distribution platforms I focus on are foreign sales, terrestrial broadcasting TV and theatrically, and studio distribution, because that's just kind of the budgets require that.
Right.
And you can't make your film if you can't get those kind of commitments in the first place.
Right.
So I'm not knocking it. It's just not my niche.
Yeah, not your niche. Oh, well, getting back then to equity, right? The first thing we were talking about in the ways of getting money.
Right. I know what you're going to ask.
You do? Okay. She's psychic. I read in this one particular book.
Here we go.
Here we go. About a way that was suggested to raise money was just go to the yellow pages.
Blind call.
Open up to the section on dentists and just start cold calling dentists because they're like a ripe target, to invest.
Right.
How do you feel about that?
Please, I implore all the listeners, do not listen to that advice.
Yeah, say it right there.
Do not do this at home. Do not cold call. Okay, I have to explain the basics of equity financing here. I hope it's not too didactic. I hope we can get through this quickly. But
and wait, before you start, can we tie it in with another question that's kind of similar?
Sure.
Because I was going to ask you about those lead lists that you get where you call and you get leads, so it kind of falls in with the dentists and these websites that offer leads for money, that sort of thing. Go ahead.
All of that is in contravention to federal and state securities laws. So sorry, do not get taken for a ride. It's a scam unless you have a public offering. And that requires, it's a very expensive and cumbersome process to have a public offering. Chances are for the budgets that we're talking about right now, it's just apples and oranges. There's no need for that. There is such a thing as private placements. And this is what, when you're raising equity, you have to go through. There's 2 kinds of investors, passive investors and active investors. If the investor, let's say you have 1 or 2 investors, and that's it, then there's an argument to be made that they're active. They're going to be involved in every step of the process. They're going to be on set. They're going to be engaged. Then you can enter into an investment agreement with them. However, if you have passive investors, you need a PPM. And
a PPM?
A private placement memorandum, which is basically a cover your ass document. Should anything go wrong. If your film is a runaway smash, no one's going to complain about anything. But should anything go wrong, and more than likely it may, because there are a lot of moving parts in a feature film to go wrong. This is how you protect yourself, by disclosing all the risks. And part of the requirement to have a PPM or private placement is that it's not a public offering, and you're only going to solicit money from those people that you know. Now, I repeat, You are not cold calling dentists.
Right.
You are going to people that you know, that you would know to the degree that you can verify that they have the wherewithal to enter into these kind of higher risk profile investments, and understand that what's at stake. And so there's a trifecta of documents that you have to go through, which is the PPM that your attorney will draft for you. Again, it's kind of like a business plan, but it's also, there's legalese in that explains the risks. It explains the market, the demographic, the genre, the people attached, the expectations of what your film monetarily may make, and it also says that it may make nothing. Along with that, you need a subscription agreement, which allows the investors to physically subscribe to shares or securities in the company that owns the copyright, that will then enter into distribution agreements that will then, through exhibition and tickets and sales, generate money. So, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say then you don't want to enter into any kind of money-making strategy without consulting a lawyer and being sure.
Absolutely. Because if you don't, you're selling securities. You're not selling a piece of the copyright.
Right.
You're selling a piece of the company that is the owner of the copyright. And if you are selling these securities, you are subject to federal and state securities laws. And they're quite complicated. And, if you will be cold calling, and like I said, you get investors and you don't make the appropriate filings that are required on the state level and on the federal level, and you lose an investor's money, that investor, you'll have a very angry investor on your hands, and that's the last thing you want to do, because then you have federal securities chasing you.
Right. And even if they're friends and family, there are still certain obligations that you have
Sure.
and the way you phrase things. And
absolutely. And it's even if the investors themselves don't chase you, because lawsuits are expensive and everyone wants to avoid them, you don't want to be on the target of the SEC. You don't want to be on their radar.
So even if no one sues you, you could wind up getting on their radar.
Exactly. Yeah. And it's not a complicated process.
Right.
It's just a very specific process of how to go about raising that private equity, which means, there's depending on what kind of equity raise you want, there's 504, 505, 506. Without getting too technical under Reg D, you have a limitation of how many accredited or non-accredited, meaning unsophisticated investors, or the specific definition of accredited is if they have,
So, for example, in California, if you form an LLC, I'm not sure, but the number might be around 25 or something.
Well, you can't actually solicit from more than 35 non-accredited investors if you're raising, depending on if you're raising $1 million up to $5 million or $5 million and over. Right. And accredited means that these investors have at least $1 million in net worth, in net assets, or in the last 2 years they've generated revenues of $200,000, or jointly as a couple $300,000 or over. So there's a specific test to all these things, which you're going through the steps to put your investment on the radar, so as if anything goes wrong and the investors say, I wasn't forewarned, your defense is, but you were. You saw it in bold red in the PPM, and you proceeded anyway. So, proceed with caution.
There you go. I'm going to ask you one last question in this area, but first, I want to get to an IM from Hard Glam. Do you like indie movies better since you worked her way down to them, and if so, why?
Yes, I absolutely do. They're more interesting from a creative perspective. I'm more interested in them. And also the market that I was working in previously for studios, I was working in Germany, and I mentioned there were incredible tax opportunities there. And, of course, the German tax authorities realized that there were these incredible tax opportunities, so they changed the law. And suddenly it became a more interesting landscape to focus on raising equity and non-equity funding through independent films, because it's like a bigger jigsaw puzzle to put together. And also I imagine for the filmmaker, it's, you go to a studio, you bring them a project. If they like it, you become a paycheck player. They pay you your producer's fee, and that's it. They have creative control, they have ownership, and you're done. From my perspective, as a producer and as also kind of a financial packaging producer and an attorney, it's a hell of a lot more fun to piece together all these unquantifiable opportunities, as opposed to just knocking on a door, going to a studio executive and begging for money.
Right.
So, yes, I find it. My answer is yes.
Sure. Now, the one last thing I wanted to get to, and kind of sew up that last segment, is there are social networking sites that are kind of popping up there where they say, put your new film project on there, and raise money through our site, and you put out the trailer, the synopsis, and people can invest, and when you hit your thing and it kind of
No,
splits.
no,
What do you think of those
no,
types of
no.
websites and those kind of deals?
The same principles apply. You know, how can you know individuals that you're basically soliciting online? You don't know them, and therefore you are in contravention of these Reg D SEC federal securities laws, and you're just begging for trouble. You know, I would say use that as a promotion tool, but not as a financing tool.
Because you always want to know who your investors are, right?
Exactly.
Okay. Let's talk about tax credits.
Mm-hmm.
There are certain states in the U.S. where it's better to make films than others.
Yes.
Why, and which ones?
Well, there's a number of them. There are currently 38 states in the United States that offer some kind of a subsidy, be that a credit or a rebate. I think most people know about Louisiana. It's quite a lucrative one. It's one of the more complicated ones because there's Napoleonic law still in Louisiana, so it's a little bit more intricate to qualify for. But there's also Massachusetts is lucrative, Connecticut is lucrative, Rhode Island is a good one, New Mexico, Florida, Hawaii. I could go on and on.
If Louisiana is the most difficult one, what might be the simplest one?
You know, I'll tell you how it works, really. First of all, people are going to say, oh, Connecticut has a 30%. That means we get 30% of our budget. Before I get around to answering your question. Well, no, I can answer your question. None of them are easy, and none of them are a killer. Right. The hardest part is timing, because most of them, how they work is you get in the queue, you get in line, and you submit your application, and you have to get your ducks in a row, and you have to submit your budget, the budget breakdown, and you have to give them a date by which you will start production. And if you do not start, it's different. Every state has its own unique specifications, but most states, if you don't start within 30 days before that date or 30 days after, you lose your place in line. So actually filling out the application, that's just heavy lifting, and also a lawyer can do that for you. It's not brain surgery. It's just really being sure that the project, when you make your submission, it's kind of the last step. It's the lowest hanging fruit in terms of financing. But if you screw up the timing, then you lose your ability to be able to collect on that tax credit. So that's the same problem that you're going to have in every state. Just be very accurate of when the project will be going into pre-production. And
how's the best way to find out which state offers what? Is it a state website? Is there one central website?
Yeah, you could just Google the state film commissions. But what I would do is there's a number of kind of the codicil of how do you get to the money of what I was starting to talk about, which is Connecticut 30%. It's a 30% credit there, but you're not going to get 30% of your budget. How it works is you can wait and spend the money and wait for the state forensic audit to make sure that you've actually spent that much, and you get your certificate, and then you can either use the certificate or sell it to someone for 100 cents on the dollar. But what good is it to you then if you need it now to put it towards your budget? Right. So what you should do is then contact a tax broker, a tax credit broker, and they will, if you've kind of patchworked together your production correctly, the other financing aspects of it, then they will monetize that credit in advance. And they will not monetize that credit in advance at 100 cents on the dollar, but a competitive rate, depending state by state, is 70 to 75 cents on the dollar. And so that's still not really what you're not getting 75 cents on the dollar. You're getting a 30% tax credit in Connecticut from 75% on average of the qualified expenses in your overall budget. So 30% of 75% discounted by 75 cents on the dollar will amount to about 15% of your budget.
So a qualified expense could be anything. Salary for crew.
It's different
location.
from state to state.
Different from state to state.
Some states allow you to take a deduction against flights in the state. Others limit it to flights out of the state. And there's a million different nuances. So you can contact your film commission for this information, or the reason I even bring up the brokers to monetize the tax credits in advance is I would say just call up a couple of tax credit brokers and have them create a little bit of a bidding war for your production, and they will give you all the info. They will do your homework for you because they want your business. So contact general information for these tax credit brokers, and then have them provide you with the booklets of information of the most up-to-date kind of opportunities on a state-by-state level.
It's like not going to a doctor to do your dental work, right? You need professionals in every area of what you're doing.
Exactly.
Right? Jennifer May, what would you like? What do you got over there?
Hi. I actually have a question. In your own personal experience, what has been the most difficult challenge, or one of the, personally, something that may have happened to you that you've actually had to go through with financing?
You know what? I hate to say this because I do this all day, every day. The financing isn't the hard part for me. You know, I take on projects that I know that I can raise all the financing from if I'm producing them. The hard part has been, you know, there was one project I was trying to get off the ground. It was a beautiful, beautiful film called August and Everything After with Pierce Brosnan and written and directed by J. Mills Goodloe. And we had everything. We had the equity, we had the debt, we had the right sales agent, we had the tax credits, and we could not cast the female lead within the time that we had allotted before the tax credits would fall out. And so that's kind of a hurdle that, you know, I couldn't surmount. And that was very frustrating because it was a project I really adored. But, you know, that's the casting process. That's not really the financing process. But anyway, it was frustrating. So there you go.
Thank you.
Thanks. Well, I'm going to skip around a little bit because there's
Sure.
so much I want to cover with you. You represent, first of all, you work with both sides, right? You work with studios, but you also work with actors, directors,
investors, tax credit brokers, debt financiers. I cover all the sides.
And you provide advice to everyone, right?
Whoever needs it. Whoever needs it the most.
Okay. Now, this is a hypothetical. Let's see if you can work with this one. Let's say you have a filmmaker who makes a film really low budget, like next to nothing, $50,000, $100,000 range, gets some good write-ups, gets some press, maybe into a few festivals, now wants to make his or her next film $500,000 range, million rate, you know, wants to grow his or her career. Do you have any advice for that particular type of filmmaker?
Yeah. Well, first of all, you've used a number going from 50,000 to 500,000 or a million. My first question would be, how did you arrive at the jump, that next number?
Okay.
And
not
you, but, you know, into Mr. Filmmaker.
Mr. Filmmaker.
How did you get to that number? And I find that the problem that most filmmakers have is they have a number that gets stuck in their head, that they haven't made it until they've made a film that's $5 million or da-da-da. And, you know, I would say the way to arrive at your budget is break down the script, see what your drop dead number is for the below the line, and really that's your budget. And if you can get one talented commercial actor on board for however much you can get them, suddenly that's your budget. Right. Right. And then, you know, you get your two leads, and basically then you go to a sales agent and say, okay, how much can you sell these guys for? And if that number is greater than the number that you have to pay them, then fantastic, you've done something right. And if you're not getting your sales estimates in excess of what you will have to pay your talent, obviously that it's not working. The talent isn't bringing the value. So I would address that, first of all. Don't get stuck on a particular number. You know, it's a very delicate balance knowing that you're paying enough for talent that will bring butts in seats, and you could definitely make enough money to cover the budget.
I think a good point to be made here is if your estimate after your talent is attached doesn't exceed your budget, then the budget's too much.
Absolutely.
And
you need to retool. You need to recast.
So where do those estimates come from? How do you evaluate what a star or what a talent brings?
Foreign sales agents.
Foreign sales agents?
Yeah, absolutely.
That's their specialty?
Yeah. They know how to different foreign sales agents of, you know, varying degrees of repute specialize in different genres and different actors, and they sell to particular buyers. So I would, if I were a filmmaker, and I have a great script, and based on my $50,000 film that perhaps didn't get widely released, right. I'm using that as my reel to investors to show them I have the right stuff, right. not to lose their money. Right. I take that and I try to circulate as widely as I can the script to try to get someone attached, and then bring it to a sales agent and say, hey, you know what, I'm serious. I've done this much of my homework. I haven't cast wide. I need your advice on who do you think you can help me sell this project by? And then you basically try to get that
It's actually a great subject area. Have you ever run into a situation where a package has been put together and a producer-director thought they had bankable casts, but they really weren't?
Yeah.
Because maybe they're like a low-level sitcom star, or they're on a dramatic deal here, but they have no bank in foreign territory,
Yeah.
and that's such a big part of, especially when we're talking in the 1 million to 5 million range, you really have to be able to make your money in the foreign market.
It happens all the time, and it happens because filmmakers don't approach the sales agent early on in the process, because you have to, you're not selling the film. You're outsourcing it to a specialist to sell the film. And I would want to know who that seller can sell. So, I won't go to someone that specializes in period pieces if I'm doing a sci-fi. I won't go to someone that's never sold. I'm going to find out the slate of what a foreign sales agent has sold, and I'm going to try to get the actors that they've sold before, because I know if they've sold them well, they'll do it again. And I kind of reverse engineer what my budget is based on what they can get for it.
Are these foreign sales agents approachable by independent filmmakers, let's say when they complete their script?
No.
Okay.
Obviously, it's a short list,
right.
And I don't play favorites.
Sure.
I advise filmmakers to, try to find inroads to whichever foreign sales agents the banks will believe that are creditworthy.
Right.
Because I can give you estimates. My grandmother can give you estimates. Doesn't mean she can sell it. Doesn't mean
Right.
a bank will believe her.
Right.
So, I can recommend highly reputed foreign sales companies like.
Right, and typically, when's the time to approach them? And are they receptive to...
The way to get to them is really, that's the job of a good producer. A producer that has those relationships, or a producer that can actually lure a director that can lure the talent, and then you walk in with a package to a foreign sales agent, and then of course they sense an opportunity to make money. Of course they're going to consider the project. Or, obviously foreign sales agents, if they had a good experience with a particular producer, they're prone to working with them again. That's why you're paying a producer. That's your entree. So try, as a writer and a burgeoning director, try to staff yourself up with the right team to open those doors.
I was reading in some of your material, you talk about Tier 1 and Tier 2 foreign sales agents.
Yeah.
How many are in that Tier 1 category?
It's a short list, and it changes around all the time because
you weren't too confident about the Tier 2s.
Yeah, I don't want to name names.
No, I know.
But there's been a lot of consolidation in the space, and so a lot of companies merged, and the marriages weren't very good, so a lot of companies dissolved, and management has kind of jumped ship on a couple of companies, but Summit is as good as they get. Their sweet spot is 20 million, and they have their own fund. So it's very difficult to get them because they tend to sell their own product. Mandate has been acquired by Lionsgate. Same kind of concept there. It's very hard to get them interested in a project that's not one of their own. But Hanway is a wonderful company. Kathy Morgan International is a wonderful company. Myriad, they know what they're doing, and it's not, these aren't my buddies.
Right.
These are companies that I know I can then go to a debt financer and say, okay, can you cash flow these pre-sales? And can you also provide gap and super gap based on the open territories of what they say that they can sell? And if they can put the seal of approval on it, then it's great with me.
I'm very sad that you're not their buddies, because I'd already written down, call them and say friends with Bianca.
Note to self.
Note to self. Here's another IM from Cricket Lee. How can you tell if your entertainment lawyer rep is legit?
If your entertainment lawyer rep is legit. Now that's kind of speaking to two different hats that
yes.
a person is wearing. You can tell if your entertainment lawyer is legit is just do your due diligence, do your homework, ask around, see their reputation, see what kind of films that they've done, who their clients are, and if you like them, if they're likable. If they're contentious, then that might not be the right fit. And then the sales reps and producers reps and attorneys are mutually exclusive of each other. They're not necessarily the same person.
They can be, but they're not.
They can be,
right.
But a producer's rep basically tries to sell a film, typically in the domestic market, at a festival, and a foreign sales company can also sell domestic, but typically is engaged to sell foreign territories to the best buyers you can get the most money out of for those distribution rights. And getting back to why I think that probably foreign sales reps are going to stay in the foreign markets and not come over to the domestic, because producers are getting smarter and they're learning how to work the relationships to land their own domestic distribution deals, which actually it's my expectation that's the job of a good producer. And therefore producers' reps are slowly becoming a thing of the past, because producers are doing their job better. They're getting savvier. And and that's a little bit of a change in the marketplace I've noticed in the past couple of years.
So if an independent filmmaker completes their film, a producer's rep, good thing, bad thing, or they're just fading away?
An unnecessary
thing, I
think. Yeah.
Because the sales agents and the distributors are readily approachable without them?
Yeah, if you've carefully constructed your package, the script and the talent, then you don't really need to pay someone a commission to be able to get your domestic deal. You can take it to the studios directly, or then you don't have to pay that commission twice. You just pay your foreign sales agent that can provide you with an entree to studio distribution.
And actually, more and more producer reps are charging a fee in addition to a commission.
Yeah.
So there's that.
Yeah.
We have another IM, C47 Hi Yukin would like to ask, what is your opinion of tax credits offered in Toronto? Is it a large incentive to film there? And how does the U.S. compare to Canada in general?
Okay. Well, Toronto is a great place to film in, and most talent likes to go there. Canada in general, and nothing against Canada. I love Canada. Canadians are lovely. I don't want to get hate mail. But the problem that filmmakers will run into is they make a paired play, they get the talent, wow, it's a go project, and then they can't get their tax credits because the lead refuses to go to frozen Saskatchewan or, somewhere in Nova Scotia. So Toronto's not really the problem. It's kind of the other parts of Canada that offer very lucrative tax credits. They're just not, it's not practical because part of negotiating the deal memo with the talent is they want to stay in the United States, for example. Or then they're going to want to fly back and forth all the time, which the savings you get from the tax credits are basically being gobbled up by the added expense of shuttling the talent back and forth. So that's one problem. And the other issue is there are so many lucrative tax credits on the state and federal level in the U.S. that they're very commensurate with, highly competitive, if not more lucrative than a lot of the Canadian provinces. And you don't have to go freezing your tush off and dragging talent halfway across North America.
I think that was the first tush reference on Filmnut in our 51st episode. Thank you very much.
My pleasure, my pleasure.
And it came from the most intelligent guest we've had. I love it. It's perfect. Cricket Lee would like to ask, is there a danger list of unpredictable actors?
Yes.
And when it comes to completion bonds, I can think of, years ago when Robert Downey Jr. was having some problems,
sure.
They were talking about the difficulty in getting a completion bond for him.
Yeah. I don't want to name names.
No, I hear you.
But
that's my job.
Yeah. Absolutely. There's a list of, high-risk actors, high-risk directors, high-risk producers. It's when you get your completion bond, it's not just looking at the actors. It's taking the production itself as a whole and seeing, okay, have we mitigated the risk in the varying above and below the line components? And also I should say that it's not just actors that have drug habits that would shut down production, but
boom
previously,
operators are notorious.
Right? Those crazies. But previously, the system is kind of changing, and I could give a perfect example, but I don't want to speak badly about talent, so hopefully you guys can figure this out. But there was a lot of press lately about an actor that was holding hostage productions and renegotiating his deal by just making the production more and more delayed. And that was a negotiating tactic. And so now he did that with studios. So now not only is that actor not popular, not working as much, but his deal memo actually changed that the studios are incentivizing him to be on the same side of the line as them by giving him actually a very low quote or not paying his usual quote and giving him back end. Therefore, he's incentivized not to delay or beleaguer the process because that's money out of his own pocket. And that is, take a note from the studios on that. If you're an independent filmmaker, try to do no-quote deals with the talent and give them a lot of back end, because if you raise your funding correctly, not through equity, you'll have more of that back end to give away, and that will keep the talent on the same side as you are, because you sink or swim. Your success is their success. So that's one way to kind of bring them to the table.
What about foreign pre-sales?
What about foreign pre-sales?
What about them?
Why are they important?
Why are they important, and
how much should I pre-sell?
Right.
Okay.
You can ask and answer the questions from this point forward.
Sure, let me just take over. Foreign pre-sales are absolutely important. How much should one pre-sale? I would say this is not a legal matter. This is a practical matter. If I were selling to you something I'm going to make, some pottery I will construct for you, and I'm describing it to you, and I want you to sell it to or buy it from me for $10, I could give you something that is hideous and you don't want to pay $10 for once you see it. So you're taking a risk in this. So foreign sales agents are selling something as a pre-sale that is at that point unquantifiable. They have things called essential elements, which means that you are going to deliver a film that is in this genre, this long, with this rating, this talent, and this director, but that's pretty much it. You don't know if the aesthetic is going to be right. You don't know if there's going to be chemistry. It could just be real crap. So right. You are pre-selling territories at a discount. It could be 50 cents on the dollar, could be more, could be less, but you're basically it's a little bit of a fire sale because it's unquantifiable. So I recommend filmmakers not pre-sell as much as they can. I recommend that they pre-sell as much as they need to give the debt financiers comfort. So typically, a debt financer is going to say, okay.
The bank or?
The bank.
Okay.
Well, there's two kinds of debt. There's GAAP, and then there's super GAAP. GAAP is
just your regular clothes, your casual wear.
Right.
And super GAAP is
it's the high line.
It's the high end.
Okay, we can also call GAAP senior debt and super GAAP mezzanine financing. And so senior debt is debt that banks come in, and when you make a pre-sale, you're not getting the money from the buyer. You're getting a commitment for the buyer to make payment once you deliver what you promise that you're going to deliver. So you're getting a contract to buy, and you take this contract and you collateralize it, and the bank will lend against it, and they'll cash flow those pre-sales. And let's say you have.
So let's just back up and do that 1, 2, 3. So you don't get the money, you get the commitment from the company
right.
that when you deliver, we'll
Let's
give you this.
say you have a budget that's $10.
Right.
Okay? You are pre-selling.
We're talking my kind of movie now.
Right. $10 or $100 or,
right.
10 million, it's all relative. Sure. So 10 is easy. And you want to get as much debt financing as you can. So the debt financer will say, I need you to pre-sell 2 foreign territories that are lucrative territories, such as France or Germany or Italy or whatever. Typically, if they're the bigger lucrative territories, you have to that's going to be about 20% of your budget. So when you make these pre-sales, these are contracts that you don't get cash for, but you take these contracts to the bank and the bank will cash flow them. Then you have, if your estimates are 10, that means you've probably over budgeted your film for $10 because your estimates are only 10. But it's still an easy number. We can work with it. You'll call it even. You won't lose money. You won't make money. You get the movie done. Hurrah. You get your Oscar. So if you pre-sell $2 out of those $10 in estimates, that leaves you $8 in open territories in these estimates. So a bank will say, okay, it's kind of the 2-to-1 rule of comfort. The bank is comfortable in lending you half of those open territories. So half of 8 is 4. So you can get $4 through a combination of GAAP financing and super GAAP financing. And the distinction between the two is that GAAP gets repaid in first position, so it's less risky. Before any equity investor gets paid back, before anyone gets paid back.
First money that comes in.
First money after the sales agent takes their commission, then the bank, the GAAP lender gets paid back in first position. Then after that, you're never going to get more than 20% of your budget through GAAP. Just GAAP lenders don't lend more than that. But you will get more than that through the super GAAP lender that takes on more risk because they get repaid in a position after GAAP. So the interest rate is higher, it's riskier, but you've got 4 out of the $10 that you need to make your movie through debt financing and an additional 2 from pre-sales that have been monetized. So you're $6 into the budget that you need. If you can monetize some tax credits of $1.50 or $2, depending on where you bring this, you only need $2 left to make your $10 film, and that's when that's your equity. Basically.
Thank you for ABCing it for me.
Yes,
that was really helpful.
Yes.
Jennifer May, what do you got for me?
Hi, how are you?
Good. How are you?
I'm good.
Glad you
Sorry,
can make it tonight.
I was looking at the I am board here. Actually, I wanted to, and I think she might have just kind of went there, but not just to the point, which is, I wonder if you can explain exactly the points. Like if you were to summarize, what are the key points you need to do, and how important are they?
The key
like
points.
for a first-time filmmaker.
Okay. Well, the first thing is identify your material. That means have a clean chain of title. Make sure you own your content. Second thing is use whatever you have to be able to sell an equity investor on making as much as you can get through equity, investing that into your film. Use that money to try to get the best possible talent you have access to. And hopefully that's enough to be able to get you in the door for a sales agent. Use that foreign sales agent to sell 20% of, or however much you need to really close your budget, 20 to 40% through pre-sales, and then try to get the rest through debt financing. And then make sure that you're going to a tax credit savvy state to produce your film, and go to a broker and monetize that, and hopefully that will cover all the budget that you need to make the film. And if you do it correctly, then you actually will have more money than you need. So at the end of this process, you can go back to your equity investors that came in the first place, and you could return their money and buy back your ownership stake. And so if it's a hit, then it's a real hit for you. And if it's a miss, then it's a miss for you.
Now, you're going to need to pay attention on this one because I have a little short novel of a question I'm going to try to get through here. Bukowski would like to know, foreign pre-sales are non-existent for the first-time filmmakers as the buyer wants to see a history of success in the U.S. First, can the first-time filmmaker actually expect to make foreign pre-sales? I think I know what the answer to this one is, but go ahead, you're the expert.
Yeah, I think the depending on how the first-time filmmaker bookends themselves, because remember, this is a collective medium. It's, it takes a lot of people to have a success, or it takes a lot of people to have a failure. And it's just like a first-time director may not be bondable, but if you bookend them with a really great line producer and a very successful first AD, very successful cinematographer, talented producers that have a track record, then that person can be bondable. So there's no law that says as a first-time filmmaker you can't have pre-sales executed. Just put your team together wisely.
Right. I mean, if your first film takes place at the local Big Bob's, coffee shop
right.
with a $20,000 budget, you're not going to do it.
Right.
But if you have the right cast, it's all about the bankable director and the bankable
right.
stars. And if you're the first, it's harder to get those things as the first-time filmmaker. But if you do,
one thing I should say is, I'm talking about $10. But typically, the example that I've given relates to films that are $4 million and up, 4 to 15 million, or 4 to whatever million. If you have a budget that's a micro budget that's considered less than 4 million, then it may not be wise.
Micro budget is 4 million is the cutoff.
That's the term of art. I didn't make it up,
okay.
but it may not make sense for a filmmaker to bring the debt into the financing model, because it will cost you the same amount in legal fees and closing fees to borrow $400,000 as it will to borrow $4 million. So, economies of scale, it proportionately may not make sense to your production. What that means is if you take the debt out, that means that you have to bring it to as lucrative of a tax credit state as you can. That means you have to raise more equity, and that means that you have to try to execute more pre-sales, even if that means at a discount.
I just want to ask you a follow-up to something you were talking about before, and maybe you can expand on it. Points in a film that actors get maybe in lieu of salary. Mm-hmm. How do those points generally work, and how liberal should you be in giving them out to get people to do stuff for your film?
Okay, there's no rule of thumb.
Right.
There's really no rule of thumb. For directors and writers, there can be a rule of thumb, but for actors, it's really whatever it takes, depending on how much you want, how badly you want the actor, how badly the project needs the actor. There's a thing called a creative corridor that you may have to negotiate with the investors that you have, which is no one can get paid a creative corridor until, or kind of a deferment mechanism for the talent, that you don't pay the talent anything right now, you pay them once the film is profitable. Well, certain investors may not stand for that because they want to get their money back, at least back before making a preferred return in terms of profitability. So you have to make sure that you should represent to the investors that I'm actually not paying the actors very much. They're passionate about the project, and they deserve to have this creative corridor before you guys get paid, or in pari passu, at the same time as you guys get paid, and just make sure it's copacetic with the investors first.
Pari passu, copacetic.
Yes.
I'm loving it.
But just to finish answering your question, you know, if you can get an actor for, you know, if you're raising 100% of your budget through equity, whatever your budget is, then typically a savvy investor is going to expect between 115% to 125% return on their investment in first position. This is after distribution fees. Since debt is not in the game, you know, they're really the first ones getting paid from the net proceeds. From that, after that, they're going to want, if they put in 100% of the budget, they're going to want typically 50% of the ownership. This is the rule of thumb. By no means do you have to stick with this. It's market driven. If someone really wants to invest in your film, then you can negotiate with them. But if that's what you end up with, then you've just given away 50% ownership. You have to give away some to the director. You have to give away some to the writer. You have to, depending on, these are regular, well, you know, depending on if it's SAG or if it's DGA or if it's WGA, but make sure that you keep at least 15% for yourself, right, because then what's the point of the exercise?
Right. Don't go Bugsy Siegel and give out more shares than you have. Right?
Exactly. Exactly. So start low and see if you can find a kind of a happy compromise between the talent and yourself.
Great. Well, we're starting to run long, so there's 2 more quick questions I want to hit you with.
Shoot.
Tax laws for filmmaking changed in 2004. Can you briefly explain what that was? And how
this could take an hour.
Okay. That is?
Yes, they did.
Brian just had his heart just started palpitating, but
yeah. Well, yes, they did.
They did.
Okay. It's part of the Runaway Production Initiative. It's called the Jobs Creation Act of 2004, implemented in November of 2004, and it wasn't specifically targeting film. It was just general runaway work, and because of international production incentives. So part of that provides for U.S. productions if they're filmed, if 75% of them is filmed within the U.S., and they are typically no more than $15 million. There are exceptions, but you know that's the exception I don't want to get into because it's very ornate in exception. Then qualifying investors, which is another long explanation of what is qualifying,
Sure.
what is not, but assuming the investor is qualified and the production remains qualified, then those investors can take 100% deduction off of their income
in that tax year.
As opposed to capitalizing it over a course of years. Yes. So there's a lot of ifs, ands, or buts, but if you can qualify for that, let's talk about what this means. If an investor wants to invest $1 million, they actually, if they're taxed at this is a federal tax deduction, so if they're taxed at a federal tax rate of 35%, they can actually give you $1.54 million because they can take that 35% deduction, which will net them out to $1 million. So suddenly, just by staying within the parameters of qualifying under this Section 181 rule, you've just created $540,000 for yourself. So if it works for you, it's fabulous. You just have to be very careful not to get yourself disqualified because it's a narrow qualification.
And then, of course, the return is you pay a capital gains tax of 15% versus 35%. So if the movie does profit, you're paying a much lower tax rate. No, that's not right?
No, that's not right. Some lawyers have actually misconstrued the use of Section 181 and taken an aggressive kind of capital gains flip, and that was not upheld. That's not how it works.
Oh, wow.
So again, this is actually I'm glad you brought that up. Right. It's a perfect example of don't do this at home. You know, the investor has to work with a competent accountant, a CPA, lawyer to analyze their specific tax profile and to due diligence the fact that the production remains qualified. And then if all turns out roses, then everyone gets to benefit from it. But make no assumptions about this. And it will also sunset at the end of this year. It may be extended, but the law, until it is extended, will sunset at the end of this year.
Wow.
That means productions have to go into production before December 31st to qualify.
Wow. Well, Bianca Bezdek,
I hope I haven't bored you guys.
No.
I'm so sorry.
I'm going to run home and change my business plan because I have to update it with a few things now that I've talked to her. Thank you very much for coming, and it was very informative, very helpful.
Thanks for putting up with me, guys.
Oh, no, it was a lot of fun.
It was great.
That was great. Jen May, thanks as always.
Thank you very much. Thank
Brian
you,
Grimeau.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
No show next week, but we are back in 2 weeks. Check out the message boards to find out who we're going to have in because you're going to love them. I promise.
Huh?